think if there was one message I'd want them to come away from the event with, really, the situation isn't great. There's a lot of devices that are still insecure. There's a lot of bolt-on stuff. There's a lot of practices that you have to go through. Security's hard, but it's not an unsolvable problem. And it really comes down to making sure that you've got people on board. And that's where our organization, our primary mission is getting those people connected so they can share those resources that do exist that are out there and really crowdsource their own future from a security perspective. So, in a dire situation, you don't just throw your arms up. You got to look for options. And we're one of those options that was born from the industry, from grassroots, boots on the ground, security wrench turners, and that's what we still do. As a nonprofit, we really got no other motive in there but to help the industry get where it needs to be, as secure as it can be, with what mechanisms we have. So, understanding that we're living in a world of extended life systems, very challenging to get budget and resources to do any of this, kind of pooling what we have together so that we can all share, so to speak, with what security resources are available, just seems to make the most sense. And a lot from the Muni perspective, I think they really have the greatest amount to gain because they're often the most strapped. And as such, they can tap those extremely hard to find and extremely expensive resources at the IOUs and others through our organization, and that way they don't have to pay the high dollar for those people. They can mentor the people that they have to groom them with those skill sets and get the awareness that they need. They can get access to tools they didn't know existed and then how to use them and maintain them, which is often harder than just getting the tool. So I think if anything that they should come away with is that it's bad, it sure is, it's frustrating, it's hard, but there's options, and options that don't cost you a lot of money,
right,
which is important.
Right. And that's something that really kind of hit over the head. You've had a pretty successful penetration rate from what I saw.
Yeah.
I mean, are you seeing any sort of are they holding back at all? I mean, what's the biggest objection you guys are running into as far as not utilizing the resources you guys have?
We got to, originally we were asset owner only, so we started out as just asset owners. I mean, this started back in originally in 2001. I worked for Pacificor at the time. Right after the September 11th terrorist attacks, I was one of the only guys out came from a telecom background, so they thought, well, you probably have the most experience out of the existing security team in this process control world that's out there. So I got tasked with that, and as you can imagine, since we were the power provider for the Olympics, we got called by every three-letter agency that existed at the time, and they asked us lots of hard questions, and we looked in places we hadn't looked in years and blew out of dust off systems, and came back with a fair bit of work to do to prepare appropriately for hosting the Olympics with the impending terrorist doom on the horizon. So we did an enormous amount of work. We literally turned the entire network upside down, looked at every single end point. We walked wires, we crawled in spaces, we did all kinds of work. And that work that we did wasn't just for our utility, but in the event that we had an issue, can we rely on neighboring utility for crews, for equipment, for additional power if we have generation loss? Can we shunt if we need to for protection systems in terms of getting load shed in certain directions? So we tapped every available emergency scenario and every available emergency person, local law enforcement, hospitals, cop shops, I mean, fire stations. So we built this network for that effort of security-minded people that had a relationship to the security of a power utility. We talked to a lot of our natural gas feeds, and contracts that weren't firm became temporarily firm. All that stuff. So, the September 11th, or sorry, the Olympics happened. There was no significant event of any kind.
Right.
So, as such, those relationships kind of languished for a while. I went off on an EMS project for a couple of years and started getting little pings from, tiny utility X and reasonable utility Y, and even like the sheriff's office in this county, and they were saying, hey, remember that thing we started up a few years ago? How do we get that back together? Because we're seeing metal theft, or we're seeing viruses, we're seeing malware. How do we get this back together so we can start talking again? Because I want to reach to this person, and I know they had good ideas there, and how do I get in touch with them? And So I built a listserv on Google Groups, and reconnected everybody, and that's when it was really officially born in 2004 at that point. And the group just grew from there, and we didn't allow vendors, we didn't allow regulators of any kind. You had to have an email address from a utility. So we vetted everybody. We'd call their manager, check them out, make sure that they could be on the list. And we kept that going for a long time. We got so big we had to have quarterly meetings. And we had one annual summit. We would allow vendors and regulators to show up and come to the party. We would talk about things in a very frank and open manner because we've been talking about it for months behind closed doors, and it was the time to, open the kimono and say, these are the issues. Now, vendors and regulators go solve these problems. So fast forward to 2010, the Department of Energy issued a grant opportunity for an organization that looked a lot like what we had. They wanted to make it a public-private partnership. So how does the federal space tap into some of this intelligence that we have? And so we won the grant, and that's when we basically created what is now the NESCO.
Sure.
And we opened the list up to vendors and regulators. We did see a dip in participation. So with that, when the asset owners kind of stopped talking because they knew the regulators and the feds and the vendors were all listening, we went back to our roots and we carved off a list where just they could talk again, gave them their own private spaces and wikis and chat channels and all this stuff, but still maintain that outer layer where everybody could play. Right. And there's still discussion that happens on both sides, but from the utility perspective, as you can imagine, a lot more happens behind closed doors.
Right, absolutely.
But there's an enormous amount of chatter and all kinds of things that goes on there. GRC solutions, one of the big threads now, and even things like checklists for background screens and you name it. So whatever utility's dealing with today, they can talk about it there and share it.
Right. So when you have that private side for the utilities and you got the public side for everybody, how do you converge the two at some point?
We will see the asset owners post to both lists at the same time, so they can get the candid private feedback, and they'll get the public feedback on the other side. I've seen vendors will compete to be the thought leader by providing a thoughtful answer without a sales pitch, so they don't come across as cheesy. Right. So yeah, they want both perspectives. So they're actually using both lists regularly to get what they need. The reverse of that is, since all of the asset owners are on both lists, the feds, for example, DOE will ask a question that they want to just poll the industry. There has been some recent releases by FBI and DHS on specific threat information. Reasonably specific threat information, never to get really specific. But so DOE recently asked, is this useful? And if not, what would make it more useful? And the industry responded back to DOE. And DOE came back and said they've never, ever gotten that level or quality of response to date. And so it goes both ways. So it's actually a communication path that never existed, that everybody is now beginning to figure out how useful it is and how to use it, and obviously make it greater than the sum of its parts.
One last question before I let you go. Uniqueness. You got to explain it.
Uniqueness.
You got to go over it.
The term, I thought of uniqueness today. I was thinking of, as I built my presentation, what are the uniquenesses that municipals have? And I'm known for word merging. It's just one of those fun things I do. So I merged muni and uniqueness, and I got uniqueness. Now, the municipal space often likes to think that it is purely unique, and the reality is they're not as unique as they'd like to think. But there are some uniquenesses that they have to live with, primarily the fact that they are public. And that is certainly one of the biggest issues, is the political issues that surround their boards, often appointees, and there's a lot of political stake in each position, along with the fact that the public really owns them. So they can go back and request things from the public perspective that is available by sunshine laws or freedom of information. All of these approaches the public has to this data. From a security perspective, maybe it's not the right approach to have access to everything. There are some things that you don't want everyone to have access to. You might have to go through specific levels of clearance or some hoops and hurdles to get it, or maybe sign some legal documents and say you can't disclose it. But so those are the uniquenesses that I wanted to call out in the presentation, is that, you have problems. A lot of people have similar problems, but here's some things that are really unique to your industry and how they reflect on your security posture and some of your security approaches to think about.